The thunder rolled across the vast Montana sky as Violet Harper urged her exhausted mare forward through the pelting rain, one hand clutching her sodden coat closed, the other gripping a precious satchel of medicine. The doctor's warning echoed in her mind. Those children won't last another day without this, Miss Harper. Lightning split the darkness, illuminating the treacherous path ahead, a narrow trail winding through rugged terrain that would lead her to the isolated Nelson Ranch, where two young lives hung in the balance. Violet had never intended to be riding through a tempest in the middle of the night, but the moment she'd overheard the doctor's grim assessment in the general store that afternoon, she knew what she had to do. The physician himself was tending to victims of a mining accident in the next county over, unable to deliver the medicine himself. Someone needed to get these remedies to the Nelson children, and quickly. "Just a little further, Penny," Violet encouraged her horse, who snorted and pressed on despite the mud sucking at her hooves. At 22, Violet was no stranger to hardship. She'd come west 2 years prior following her parents' deaths, hoping to make a new start as a schoolteacher in Silverwood, Montana. The year was 1883, and the frontier town had welcomed her education and refinement, if cautiously. Many still viewed her as an outsider, the proper Eastern lady who didn't quite belong in their rough-hewn world. But tonight, she was determined to prove that she had more mettle than any of them suspected. Another flash of lightning revealed the outline of a small cabin nestled against the hillside, smoke curling from its chimney despite the storm. Relief flooded through Violet's chilled body. She'd found it. As she approached, the cabin door burst open. A tall figure wielding a shotgun emerged onto the porch. "Who goes there?" The man's voice cut through the drumming rain. "Violet Harper," she called back, her throat raw from the cold. "From Silverwood. I've brought medicine from Dr. Peterson for your children." The man lowered his weapon slowly, disbelief etched across his features. As Violet drew closer, she could make out his appearance broad-shouldered and weathered, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from his brief exposure to the rain. His eyes, a startling shade of blue even in the dim light, reflected both wariness and desperate hope. "Nathan Young," he introduced himself, still seemingly stunned by her arrival. "Get inside, quickly." Violet dismounted, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. She'd been riding for 3 hours through the worst storm of the season. Nathan reached for her elbow to steady her, then gestured toward a lean-to beside the cabin. "Stables there. Your horse needs shelter." "The medicine first," Violet insisted, clutching the precious satchel. "I was told there's no time to waste." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, gratitude mingled with urgency. He nodded once, then took the reins from her. "I'll see to your mare. Go on in my mother's with the children." Violet didn't wait for further instruction. She hurried into the cabin, where the warmth hit her like a physical force after hours in the cold. The interior was simple, but well-kept, a main room with a fireplace, a table with 4 chairs, and doorways leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. From one of those doorways emerged an elderly woman, her silver hair tied back in a loose braid, deep worry lines etched around her kind eyes. "You must be the angel Nathan just hollered about," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm Martha Young. The children are this way." Martha led Violet to a small bedroom where 2 small figures lay on a single bed. A boy of about 7 and a girl who couldn't have been more than 5, both flushed with fever, their breathing labored and raspy. "Emma and Joseph," Martha whispered. "The influenza hit them 3 days ago. Took a turn for the worse yesterday." Violet immediately began unpacking the medicine. "Dr. Peterson sent specific instructions," she explained, retrieving a folded paper from inside the satchel. She handed it to Martha, then pulled out 2 bottles of medicine. "I was a nurse during the war," Martha said, scanning the instructions. "I can administer this. Thank the Lord you've come." The cabin door opened again, and Nathan strode in, bringing the scent of rain and horse with him. His clothes were soaked through, but he paid no mind to his own discomfort as he crossed quickly to the bedside. "How are they?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. "No change," Martha replied, already measuring the first dose of medicine. "But this good woman has brought what they need." Nathan turned to Violet, who was still standing in her drenched clothes, water pooling at her feet. "You're soaked through," he observed. "You'll catch your death." "Martha, can you spare some dry things for Miss Harper?" Martha nodded without looking up from her task. "In my trunk." "The blue dress should fit well enough." Nathan gestured toward another door. "You can change in there, I'll stoke the fire." Violet hesitated, glancing at the children. "Go on," Martha urged gently. "You've done your part bringing this medicine, now let me do mine." Reluctantly, Violet retreated to the indicated room, clearly Nathan's mother's quarters. She found the blue dress, a simple cotton garment that was indeed close to her size, if a bit loose. As she changed, peeling off her sodden layers, she could hear the low murmur of conversation between mother and son. "Rode all this way in this storm." Nathan was saying, "The Lord provides," came Martha's steady reply. When Violet emerged in the borrowed dress, her wet hair braided and pinned as neatly as she could manage, Nathan was standing by the fire, hands braced against the mantel, staring into the flames. He straightened when he heard her, turning to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Why did you do it?" he asked simply. Violet moved closer to the fire, seeking its warmth. "What do you mean, ride out here, in this storm, for strangers?" His voice wasn't accusatory, just genuinely bewildered. Violet considered the question. "I heard Dr. Peterson tell Mrs. Abernathy that your children needed this medicine urgently, that they might not," she faltered, "that they wouldn't survive without it. The doctor couldn't come himself and no one else volunteered. So you did." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Violet met his gaze steadily. "I did." Something passed between them, then a moment of understanding that transcended words. Nathan Young was looking at her, as though seeing her truly for the first time, and Violet found herself unable to look away from those penetrating blue eyes. The moment was broken by a clap of thunder so violent that the cabin seemed to shudder. Nathan glanced toward the window, where rain still lashed against the glass. "You can't go back tonight," he stated. "The creek will be flooded by now. You'd never make it across." Violet hadn't considered that. "But I need to get back. The school will have to manage without you tomorrow," Nathan finished firmly. "I won't have your death on my conscience after what you've done for my family tonight." Martha appeared in the bedroom doorway. "I've given them both the first dose," she reported. "Now we wait and pray. Miss Harper will be staying the night," Nathan informed his mother. "The storm's too dangerous," Martha nodded, unsurprised. "I thought as much. You'll take my bed, dear. I'll sit with the children." "I couldn't possibly," Violet began to protest. "You could and you will," Martha cut her off with gentle authority. "You've had a difficult journey. Rest now. We'll need fresh eyes to help with the children come morning." Nathan crossed to a cupboard and withdrew a bottle and glass. "Whiskey." He offered Violet, "To warm you." Violet rarely drank spirits, but tonight seemed an exception. She accepted the small glass with a nod of thanks and took a cautious sip, the liquid burning a warm path down her throat. "Nathan," Martha said, her tone brooking no argument, "get out of those wet clothes before you join the children in their sickness." For the first time, Violet saw a hint of a smile touch Nathan's lips as he glanced at his mother. "Yes, madam." As he disappeared into what must be his bedroom, Martha turned to Violet. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "Stubborn as the day is long, but good. Been raising those children alone for 2 years now." "What happened to their mother?" Violet asked before she could stop herself. Martha's face grew solemn. "Childbed fever. Emma was just born. It hit hard and fast." She sighed deeply. "Nathan brought me to help, but he's the one who's held this family together. Works himself to the bone for those children." Violet's heart constricted at the thought of what this family had endured. Before she could respond, a small voice called from the bedroom. "Grandma." Martha hurried back to the children, and Violet found herself alone in the main room, the fire crackling and the storm raging outside. She sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. The warmth of the cabin and the whiskey combined to make her eyelids heavy. She must have dozed, for the next thing she knew, Nathan was gently shaking her shoulder. "Miss Harper," he said softly, "you should lie down properly." Violet blinked up at him, momentarily disoriented. Nathan had changed into dry clothes, a simple flannel shirt and trousers. His hair was still damp but combed back from his forehead, revealing a strong brow and those remarkable eyes. "The children?" she asked immediately. "No change yet," he replied, helping her to her feet. "But Mother says that's to be expected. The medicine needs time to work." He led her to Martha's room, where the bed had been turned down. "Get some rest," he urged. "You've earned it." Violet was too tired to argue. She managed a small thank you before Nathan withdrew, closing the door behind him. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Violet lay awake, listening to the storm gradually subsiding and the occasional murmur of voices from the children's room. She thought of the man in the next room, a widower raising 2 young children in this isolated place, working a ranch with only his elderly mother for support. The depth of his commitment to his family moved her deeply. Eventually, she drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be awakened by sunlight streaming through the window. The storm had passed. Violet rose quickly, smoothing the borrowed dress as best she could. When she emerged, she found Nathan at the stove, stirring something that smelled wonderfully of cinnamon. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there the night before. "Mother said you might like some hot porridge." "Thank you," Violet replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She must look a fright after yesterday's ordeal. "How are the children?" Nathan's expression brightened considerably. "Better. Their fevers broke around dawn. They're sleeping naturally now." Relief washed over Violet. "Thank goodness." "No," Nathan said seriously, setting down his spoon and facing her fully. "Thank you, without that medicine." He couldn't finish the thought. "I'm glad I could help," Violet said simply. Martha appeared, looking tired but content. "They're asking for breakfast," she announced. A good sign indeed. Nathan immediately began preparing 2 small bowls of porridge. "I'll take these in." As he disappeared into the children's room, Martha gave Violet an approving look. "You should eat too," she said, gesturing to the pot. "Nathan makes a decent porridge, though don't tell him I said so." Violet accepted a bowl gratefully, realizing how hungry she was. The porridge was indeed good, sweetened with honey and seasoned with cinnamon. "I should return to town as soon as possible," Violet said between bites. "They'll be worried about me," Martha nodded. "Nathan will take you. The creek might still be high. You'll need to know where the safe crossing is." Before Violet could respond, a small figure appeared in the bedroom doorway, the little girl, Emma, pale but alert, leaning against the door frame. "Are you the angel?" she asked Violet directly, her voice small but clear. Violet set down her bowl. "No, dear, I'm Miss Harper. I'm the school teacher from Silverwood." Emma considered this. "Papa said an angel brought our medicine through the storm." From behind Emma, Nathan appeared, looking slightly embarrassed. "Emma, you should be in bed." "But I wanted to see the angel," Emma protested. Nathan scooped his daughter into his arms with practiced ease. "Miss Harper is our guest," he explained gently. "She braved the storm to bring you and Joseph medicine when you were sick." Emma's eyes, the same striking blue as her father's, widened as she studied Violet. "Thank you," she said with childish solemnity. "You're very welcome," Violet replied, touched by the child's earnestness. "Can Miss Harper stay?" Emma asked her father. "Just for a little while." Nathan glanced at Violet apologetically. "Miss Harper needs to get back to town, sweetheart. She has students waiting for her." "Actually," Violet found herself saying, "today is Saturday. The school is closed until Monday." Emma's face brightened. "Then you can stay." Nathan looked uncertain. "We couldn't impose further. It's no imposition," Violet assured him, surprised by her own eagerness to remain. "I'd like to see how the children are progressing, if you don't mind." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, relief, perhaps, or pleasure. "We'd be glad of your company," he said quietly, and so it was decided. Violet would stay until Sunday, when Nathan would escort her back to Silverwood. As the day progressed, she found herself drawn into the rhythms of the young household. Joseph, the 7-year-old boy, emerged from his sick by midday, weak but improving steadily. Both children were fascinated by their visitor, especially when they learned she was a teacher. "Do you know lots of stories?" Joseph wanted to know. "Quite a few," Violet admitted, smiling at his enthusiasm. "Will you tell us one?" Emma pleaded. "Papa's stories are always about boring cows." Nathan, who was mending a bridle at the table, looked up with mock indignation. "Boring. My cow stories are the finest in the territory." The children giggled, and Violet felt a warmth spread through her at the easy affection between father and children. She found herself wondering what kind of husband Nathan had been, what kind of man he was beyond the protective father she'd witnessed. As if reading her thoughts, Martha touched her arm. "Come help me gather some herbs from my garden," she suggested. "The air will do you good." Outside, the world was fresh washed from the storm. The sky stretched endlessly blue above the ranch, which Violet could now see consisted of the cabin, a barn, corrals, and several fenced pastures where cattle grazed in the distance. Mountains rose majestically on the horizon. "It's beautiful here," Violet remarked as she followed Martha to a small, well-tended garden beside the cabin. "It is," Martha agreed, bending to inspect her plants. "Hard country, but good. Nathan's father staked this claim 20 years ago, built everything you see with his own hands." "And Nathan continued after him," Martha nodded, handing Violet a small basket. "Samuel, my husband, passed 5 years back, pneumonia. Nathan was already running most of the operation by then." She straightened, wincing slightly as she pressed a hand to her lower back. "These old bones aren't what they used to be. Let me," Violet offered, taking the shears from Martha's hand. "Just tell me what to cut." As they worked side by side, Martha spoke of her son with a mother's pride and candor. "He's never quite been the same since Rebecca died," she confided. "Throws himself into the work, lives for those children. But a man needs more, don't you think?" Violet felt her cheeks warm at the implication. "I wouldn't presume to know what Mr. Young needs." Martha gave her a knowing look but didn't press the point. Instead, she changed the subject. "You're not like most of the young women in Silverwood." "No," Violet agreed. "I suppose I'm not. You came from back east, they say. Philadelphia. My parents died of typhoid 2 years ago. I had an offer to teach here, so I took it." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Takes courage to start fresh so far from home." "Or desperation," Violet replied with a small smile. "Sometimes they look remarkably similar." Martha laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I like you, Violet Harper, you speak your mind." From inside the cabin came the sound of a child's laughter, followed by Nathan's deeper chuckle. The domesticity of it struck Violet unexpectedly, making her realize how isolated her life in town had become. She had her students and a few acquaintances among the other townswomen, but no real connections. No family. "They're lucky to have each other," she said softly. Martha's gaze was penetrating. "We all need someone, dear, even the most independent among us." Before Violet could respond, the cabin door opened and Nathan stepped out, squinting in the bright sunlight. "Mother, have you seen?" He stopped when he spotted them in the garden. "There you are. Emma's asking for some of your willow bark tea, says her throat's scratchy again." "I'll brew some right away," Martha said, gathering her basket. As she passed Nathan, she patted his arm. "Miss Harper has been a great help." Left alone with Nathan, Violet suddenly felt unaccountably shy. She busied herself cutting a sprig of lavender. "Your mother has a wonderful garden," she commented. "She's always had a way with growing things," Nathan replied, moving closer. "Unlike me, I can raise cattle and fix fences, but plants wither at my approach." Violet smiled at this. "We all have our talents." "And yours?" he asked. "Beyond braving storms and teaching children, that is." The question caught her off guard. No one in Silverwood had ever asked about her talents or interests beyond her suitability for teaching. "I play the piano," she admitted. "Or I did, back in Philadelphia. And I enjoy painting, though I'm not particularly skilled." Nathan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Emma has been asking for music lessons. She has a little tin whistle her grandfather made, but none of us can show her how to play properly." "I could," Violet offered before she could think better of it. "I mean, while I'm here, I could show her the basics." Something in Nathan's face softened. She'd like that. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant blur. Violet taught Emma the rudiments of music using her whistle, helped Martha prepare a hearty stew for dinner, and listened to Joseph's excited descriptions of ranch life. By evening, both children were showing marked improvement, though they tired easily and were sent to bed early. As darkness fell, Violet found herself sitting on the porch with Nathan, watching as the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky. Martha had retired to her room, now shared with Emma, to give Violet the privacy of Joseph's bed for the night. "I can't thank you enough," Nathan said after a comfortable silence. "Not just for the medicine, but for staying. The children have taken to you." "They're wonderful children," Violet replied honestly. "You should be proud." "I am." Nathan's profile was strong against the darkening sky. "They're everything to me." Another silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something about Nathan Young that put Violet at ease, a steadiness, a quiet strength that was reassuring rather than intimidating. "Will you tell me about their mother?" Violet asked softly, then immediately regretted her boldness. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "No," Nathan said, his voice low. "It's all right." He took a deep breath. "Rebecca was vibrant, full of life and laughter. We grew up together, married young. She wanted a big family." His hands tightened on the porch railing. "After Joseph was born, we waited a couple of years before trying again. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. By the time Emma came, Rebecca was too weak to fight the fever that followed." Violet could hear the grief still present in his voice. "I'm so sorry." Nathan nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "What about you?" he asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. "No husband waiting back in Silverwood?" "No," Violet said simply. "Teaching positions are hard to come by for married women." "Is that the only reason?" Violet considered the question. "I had a suitor in Philadelphia. We were practically engaged when my parents died, but when I decided to come west, he declined to accompany me." "His loss," Nathan said with surprising vehemence. Their eyes met in the growing darkness, and Violet felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. There was an intensity to Nathan's gaze that both thrilled and unsettled her. The cabin door opened, breaking the moment. Martha stood there, a concerned expression on her face. "Emma's fever is rising again," she announced. "Nothing too alarming yet, but we should give her another dose of the medicine." Nathan was on his feet immediately, all thoughts of starlit conversations forgotten. Violet followed him inside, where they found Emma restless in her bed, her cheeks flushed. "I don't feel good, Papa," she whimpered as Nathan laid a cool hand on her forehead. "I know, sweetheart," he soothed. "We're going to help you feel better." Violet retrieved the medicine from the shelf where Martha had placed it. Together, they coaxed Emma to take the bitter liquid. Then Nathan sat beside her, stroking her hair and softly singing a lullaby until she drifted back to sleep. The tenderness of the scene brought unexpected tears to Violet's eyes. She withdrew quietly to give father and daughter privacy, stepping back onto the porch where the night air could cool her heated cheeks. Martha joined her a few minutes later. "She'll be fine," the older woman assured her. "The medicine is working. This is just a small setback." "She's fortunate to have such devoted care," Violet replied, composing herself. Martha studied her face in the dim light from the cabin window. "You've come to care for them," she observed, "in just a day." It wasn't a question, but Violet answered anyway. "They're easy to care for." "Yes," Martha agreed. "They are." She patted Violet's hand. "Get some rest, dear. I have a feeling tomorrow will be a better day." Martha's prediction proved accurate. By morning, Emma's fever had broken again, and both children were markedly improved. Joseph even felt well enough to proudly show Violet around the ranch, holding her hand as they toured the barn and corrals. "Papa says I'll have my own horse next year," he informed her importantly. "A real cow pony, not just an old nag." "That's a big responsibility," Violet remarked, smiling at his enthusiasm. "I can handle it," Joseph assured her with all the confidence of his 7 years. "Papa says I'm growing into a fine rancher." From across the corral where he was checking a horse's hoof, Nathan caught Violet's eye and smiled a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his usually serious face. Violet couldn't help but smile back, feeling a connection forming between them that went beyond gratitude or circumstance. The day passed in pleasant domesticity. Violet helped Martha with the washing, taught Emma more tunes on her whistle, and even assisted Nathan in preparing a midday meal when Martha needed to rest. By late afternoon, it was clear the children were on the mend, their eyes bright and their appetites returning. "You'll be able to return to school on Monday," Violet told Joseph as they sat at the table drawing pictures with the stub of a pencil and some old paper Martha had found. The boy's face fell. "Do you have to go back to town tomorrow?" "I'm afraid so," Violet said gently. "My students will be expecting me on Monday morning." "But you could visit," Emma piped up from where she sat playing with her doll. "Couldn't she, Papa?" Nathan, who had been quietly mending a harness by the fire, looked up. "Miss Harper has her own life in town, Emma, but perhaps she would be willing to call on us occasionally." His eyes met Violet's, questioning. "I would like that very much," Violet said, meaning it sincerely. Later, as the children played quietly and Martha dozed in her chair, Nathan invited Violet to walk with him to check on a newborn calf in the nearby pasture. "You don't have to come," he said, suddenly hesitant. "I know you've already done more than enough for us." "I'd like to see the calf," Violet assured him, reaching for her shawl. They walked in companionable silence through the golden late afternoon light. The storm had left the world washed clean, and wildflowers dotted the rolling grassland with splashes of color. In the distance, the mountains stood purple against the sky. "It's truly beautiful here," Violet remarked, breathing in the scent of sage and grass. "It is," Nathan agreed, "though I imagine it seems quite primitive compared to Philadelphia." "Different," Violet corrected, "not lesser." Nathan glanced at her with something like appreciation. "Most city folk can't wait to return to their comforts when they visit." "I'm not most city folk," Violet replied with a small smile. "I've been in Montana for 2 years now. I consider it home." They reached a small protected area of the pasture where a brown cow stood watchfully over a tiny calf. The newborn was still wobbling on its spindly legs, but it was nursing vigorously. "Born during the storm," Nathan explained, keeping his voice low to avoid startling the animals. "First of the season." Violet watched the mother and calf with wonder. "She seems to be doing well. She is a good mother." Nathan's expression softened as he observed the animals. Nature has its own wisdom about these things. They stood together in silence for a few moments, simply watching. Violet was acutely aware of Nathan beside her, his steady presence, the faint scent of leather and soap that seemed to surround him. When his hand accidentally brushed against hers, she felt a jolt of awareness that startled her with its intensity. If Nathan noticed her reaction, he gave no sign. But as they turned to head back to the cabin, he said quietly, "I'm glad you stayed, Violet." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "I'm glad too," she replied simply. That evening after supper, at the children's insistence, Violet told stories while they sat around the fire. She recounted fairy tales and fables, changing her voice for different characters and drawing the children and the adults into the magic of the narratives. Even Nathan, who had initially continued with his mending, set his work aside to listen, his eyes reflecting the firelight as he watched her. When the children were finally tucked into bed, Nathan, Martha, and Violet sat at the table sharing cups of coffee and conversation that ranged from ranch matters to Violet's experiences teaching in Silverwood. "The town has grown considerably since I arrived," Violet was saying. "The railroad spur has brought new businesses and families. And suitors, I imagine," Martha commented with a meaningful glance at her son. "A young woman like yourself must have gentlemen callers." Violet felt her cheeks warm. "There have been expressions of interest," she admitted. "But I've been focused on my teaching." Nathan's expression had grown unreadable. "Silverwood's a rough place still," he remarked. "Not many men there would appreciate a woman of your education." "Perhaps not," Violet agreed. "But then, I'm not looking to be appreciated solely for my education or lack thereof." "What are you looking for, then?" Nathan asked, his eyes intent on her face. The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that went beyond casual conversation. Before Violet could formulate a response, Martha rose from the table with a poorly disguised yawn. "These old bones need rest," she announced. "Don't stay up too late, you two." After Martha retired, a new awareness settled between Violet and Nathan. They were essentially alone, with only the crackling fire and the occasional soft snore from the children's room to break the silence. "I should probably retire as well," Violet said, though she made no move to stand. "Probably," Nathan agreed, equally stationary. Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed in this short time. "Violet," Nathan began, his voice low and uncertain. "I don't want to presume, but a small cry from the children's room interrupted him." Both adults were immediately alert. "Emma," Nathan said, rising quickly. They hurried to the bedroom where Emma was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. "I had a bad dream," she sobbed as her father gathered her into his arms. "SHH, it's all right," Nathan soothed, stroking her hair. "I'm here." Joseph had awakened as well, blinking sleepily from his bed. "Is Emma okay?" "She's fine," Violet assured him, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Just a nightmare." "Can you stay?" Joseph asked, his small hand finding hers. "Until I fall asleep again." Violet glanced at Nathan, who nodded over Emma's head. "Of course I'll stay," she told Joseph, and so they sat, one adult with each child, until both children drifted back to sleep. When they finally tiptoed out of the bedroom, closing the door softly behind them, the intimate moment from earlier had passed, replaced by something equally meaningful but different, a shared understanding of what it meant to care for these children. "You're good with them," Nathan observed quietly as they returned to the main room. "They make it easy," Violet replied. "They're wonderful children. They're usually more reserved with strangers, but with you." Nathan shook his head slightly as if puzzled. "It's like they've known you much longer." Violet wasn't sure how to respond to that. She was saved from having to try when Nathan continued, "What I was going to say earlier, before Emma woke." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I don't want tomorrow to be goodbye, not permanently." The simple statement, so plainly spoken, touched Violet deeply. "I don't want that either," she admitted. Nathan's expression lightened. "Then perhaps, would you consider visiting? On occasion, the children would be thrilled," and he hesitated briefly. "So would I." "I'd like that," Violet said, her heart quickening at the thought. "Very much." They stood looking at each other for a long moment, neither quite ready to end the conversation but both aware of the propriety of the situation. Finally, Nathan cleared his throat. "We should get some rest." "It's a long ride back to town tomorrow." "Yes," Violet agreed. "Good night, Nathan." "Good night, Violet." As she settled into Joseph's small bed, Violet found herself revisiting the events of the past 2 days. What had begun as a desperate ride through a storm had become something she couldn't have anticipated, a connection to a family that had somehow begun to feel like her own. The thought both exhilarated and frightened her. She had built a life for herself in Silverwood, independent and focused on her teaching. These new feelings for Nathan and his children threatened to complicate that carefully constructed existence. And yet, as she drifted toward sleep, Violet couldn't bring herself to regret any of it. Morning came all too quickly. After a hearty breakfast, during which both children pleaded with Violet to visit again soon, Nathan saddled 2 horses, Violet's mare and his own gelding. "I'll accompany you all the way to town," he explained as they prepared to depart. The creek might still be running high in places. The children's goodbye was emotional. Emma clung to Violet's skirts until Nathan gently pried her away, and Joseph solemnly presented Violet with a polished stone he'd been keeping in his pocket. "It's my lucky rock," he informed her. "But you can borrow it until you come back." Touched, Violet carefully tucked the stone into her pocket. "I'll guard it with my life," she promised. Martha embraced Violet warmly. "You've been a blessing," the older woman said, "and not just because of the medicine." As they rode away from the cabin, Violet found herself repeatedly looking back until the family's waving figures grew too small to distinguish. Only then did she turn forward, focusing on the path ahead. "They'll miss you," Nathan said after they'd ridden in silence for some time. "And I'll miss them," Violet replied honestly. The journey back to Silverwood took them through stunning countryside, verdant valleys, stands of aspen trees just beginning to leaf out, and the ever-present mountains watching over all. They talked easily, learning more about each other with each passing mile. Nathan spoke of his hopes for the ranch and his children. Violet shared stories of her students and her adjustment to frontier life. "It must have been difficult," Nathan remarked as they stopped to rest the horses beside a clear stream. "Coming west alone after losing your parents." Violet gazed at the rushing water, considering her answer. "It was, but staying in Philadelphia would have been worse, I think. Too many memories, too many reminders. And now, is Montana home? She looked up at him, struck again by the intensity of his blue eyes. It's becoming so, she said softly. As they approached Silverwood in the late afternoon, Violet felt an unexpected reluctance. The bustling town, with its wooden sidewalks and busy Main Street, seemed jarring after the peace of the ranch. They stopped at the livery stable first, where Nathan arranged for Violet's mare to be cared for. Then he walked her to the small house near the schoolhouse where she boarded. "Well," Violet said as they stood awkwardly on her front porch. "Thank you for the escort." "Thank you," Nathan countered, "for everything." They fell silent, both aware that this parting held more significance than it should for people who had known each other such a short time. "When do you think?" Violet began at the same moment Nathan said. "Perhaps you might." They both stopped, then laughed, the tension broken. "You first," Nathan offered. "I was just wondering when you might be coming to town next," Violet said, trying to sound casual. "As it happens, I need supplies within the fortnight," Nathan replied. "Perhaps we could meet then. I could bring the children." Violet smiled, warmth spreading through her at the thought. "I'd like that very much." Nathan stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Violet, I know this is unconventional. We've known each other only days, but I feel—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I know," Violet said simply. "I feel it too." Something in Nathan's face relaxed at her understanding. Carefully, as if giving her every chance to withdraw, he reached for her hand. His touch was gentle but firm, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Until we meet again," he said softly. "Until then," Violet echoed. She watched as he mounted his horse and rode away, her heart lighter than it had been in years despite the parting. As she turned to enter her house, Violet's fingers closed around Joseph's lucky stone in her pocket. She smiled to herself, already looking forward to returning it to him and to seeing his father again. True to his word, Nathan brought the children to Silverwood 12 days later. Violet heard them before she saw them, Emma's excited voice calling her name as they approached the schoolhouse where Violet was tidying up after the day's lessons. "Miss Harper, we came to town," Emma announced, bursting through the door and running straight into Violet's arms. Joseph followed more sedately, though his face lit up when he spotted her. "Did you keep my rock safe?" he wanted to know. "Of course," Violet assured him, fishing the stone from her pocket and placing it solemnly in his outstretched palm. Nathan entered last, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His eyes found Violet's immediately, and the warmth in his gaze made her heart skip. "Miss Harper," he greeted her formally, though his expression was anything but. "Mr. Young," she replied, equally formal but with a smile she couldn't suppress. "What a pleasant surprise." "We came for supplies," Emma informed her importantly, "and Papa said we could visit you if you weren't too busy." "I'm never too busy for you," Violet told the little girl honestly. They spent the afternoon together, first at the schoolhouse, where Violet showed the children her collection of books and teaching materials, then strolling through town, where Nathan attended to his business while Violet took the children for ice cream at the new confectionery. As evening approached, Nathan suggested dinner at the hotel restaurant, a rare treat for the children, who were both excited at the prospect of dining out. During the meal, Violet couldn't help but notice how they already felt like a family unit, with Nathan attentive to both his children and to her, and the children clearly comfortable in her presence. After dinner, as they walked back toward the livery to collect Nathan's wagon, Joseph and Emma ran ahead, leaving the adults to follow at a more sedate pace. "They've talked of nothing but seeing you again," Nathan told Violet, his voice low. "I think they've adopted you." Violet's heart warmed at the thought. "They're very special children." "Yes," Nathan agreed, then added more hesitantly, "and what about their father? Has he made an impression as well?" The directness of the question startled Violet, but she appreciated his honesty. "He has," she admitted. "A significant one." Nathan's hand found hers, a brief touch in the gathering dusk. "Good," he said simply, "because he finds himself thinking about a certain schoolteacher far more than is probably wise." Violet felt a blush rise to her cheeks but met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps wisdom is overrated." Nathan's laugh was soft and genuine. "Perhaps it is." That visit marked the beginning of a courtship unlike any Violet could have imagined for herself. Over the next several months, Nathan found reasons to bring the children to Silverwood regularly. Sometimes they would stay only for an afternoon. Other times they would remain overnight at the hotel, allowing for longer visits. On several occasions, Violet rode out to the ranch for Sunday dinner, returning to town in the evening with Nathan as her escort. As summer turned to autumn, Violet found herself increasingly drawn to the small family. The children now greeted her with unrestrained affection, and she found herself loving them with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. As for Nathan, their connection had deepened into something profound. They had not spoken openly of love or a future together, but the possibility hung in the air between them, unacknowledged but ever present. The first snow of the season fell in early November, dusting Silverwood with a powdery white that transformed the frontier town into something magical. Violet was teaching her students about the poetry of Robert Frost when she heard the now familiar sound of Nathan's wagon outside. Dismissing the class a few minutes early, she hurried to the door, expecting to see the usual happy faces of Emma and Joseph. Instead, she found only Nathan, his expression grave. "What is it?" she asked immediately, her heart constricting. "The children, they're all right," Nathan assured her quickly. "But Joseph has taken ill, a bad cough that's settled in his chest. Mother's with him, but—" "You need medicine," Violet finished for him, already reaching for her coat. "Have you seen Dr. Peterson? He's away delivering a baby at the Peterson homestead," Nathan explained. "His assistant gave me a prescription, but said the apothecary might not have everything we need." "Then we'll find it," Violet said firmly. Together, they visited the apothecary, who was able to provide most of the needed remedies but recommended they check with Mrs. Williams, an elderly widow known for her knowledge of herbal medicines, for the rest. Mrs. Williams not only provided the herbs but also detailed instructions for their use. As they prepared to leave town, snow began to fall more heavily. Nathan looked at the darkening sky with concern. "This storm's moving in faster than I expected," he said. "I need to get back to Joseph, but I don't like the idea of you riding out in this weather later." "Then I'll come with you now," Violet decided. "I can stay overnight if necessary. Mrs. Abernathy can take my class tomorrow if the weather's still bad." Nathan's relief was palpable. "Thank you." The journey to the ranch was challenging, with the snow falling thicker by the minute and the wind picking up strength. By the time they arrived, a full blizzard was raging around them. Martha met them at the door, her face lined with worry. "Thank the Lord," she said, ushering them inside. "Joseph's fever is climbing." Violet immediately set to work with Martha, preparing the medicines while Nathan went to his son's side. Emma sat quietly in a corner, her usual exuberance subdued by concern for her brother. "Will Joey be okay?" she asked Violet in a small voice. "We're going to help him get better," Violet assured her, drawing the little girl into a quick embrace. "Sometimes people get sick, but we have medicine to make them well again." Through the night, they tended to Joseph. His cough was indeed worrying deep and rattling, and his fever rose and fell in waves. Nathan refused to leave his son's side, his face growing more haggard as the hours passed. Around midnight, Martha finally insisted that Nathan get some rest. "You'll be no good to him if you collapse," she pointed out pragmatically. "Violet and I will watch over him for a while." Reluctantly, Nathan withdrew to catch a few hours of sleep. Violet sat beside Joseph's bed, applying cool cloths to his forehead and administering the medicines at the prescribed intervals. Martha dozed in a chair nearby, ready to assist if needed. In the quiet of the night, with only the sound of the blizzard outside and Joseph's labored breathing, Violet found herself praying fervently, something she hadn't done with any regularity since her parents' deaths. She prayed for Joseph's recovery, for strength for Nathan and Martha, and for guidance in her own heart, which had become so entangled with this family's welfare. Near dawn, Joseph's fever finally broke. His breathing eased and he fell into a natural, healing sleep. When Nathan returned, bleary-eyed but somewhat rested, Violet was able to give him the good news. "The medicine is working," she told him softly. "His fever's gone and his breathing is easier." Nathan's shoulders sagged with relief. He reached for Violet's hand, his grip tight. "Thank you," he whispered. "Again, you've come through a storm to help my children." "It seems to be becoming a habit," Violet replied with a tired smile. Outside, the blizzard continued unabated. It was clear that Violet wouldn't be returning to town that day or possibly the next. Martha insisted she take her bed, but Violet refused, unwilling to displace the elderly woman again. "I can rest perfectly well on the settee," she insisted. After checking on Joseph once more, Violet finally allowed herself to lie down, pulling a quilt over her exhausted body. She was asleep almost instantly, the strain of the night catching up with her. She woke several hours later to the sound of quiet conversation and the smell of coffee brewing. Opening her eyes, she found the main room empty, the voices coming from the children's bedroom. Sitting up, she combed her fingers through her hair and straightened her rumpled clothes as best she could. Nathan emerged from the bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. His face brightened when he saw Violet awake. "Good afternoon," he greeted her, crossing to pour a cup of coffee, which he brought to her. "You were sleeping so deeply we didn't want to wake you." "Joseph?" Violet asked immediately, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Much improved," Nathan assured her. "The cough is looser and he's alert. Even asked for food, which Mother is preparing now." "Thank goodness," Violet said with feeling. Nathan sat beside her on the settee, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Seems I'm becoming indebted to you in ways I can never repay," he said quietly. "There's no debt between friends," Violet replied. "Friends?" Nathan repeated the word as if testing it. "Is that what we are, Violet?" Her heart quickened at his tone. "What would you call us?" Nathan set his coffee cup aside and turned to face her fully. "I'd call us much more than friends," he said, his voice low and serious. "At least, that's what I hope we are or could be." Violet found herself unable to look away from the intensity of his gaze. "What exactly are you saying, Nathan?" He took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I've come to care for you deeply, that these past months have shown me what my life could be like with you in it, that my children adore you, and my mother thinks you hung the moon." He paused, then added more softly, "and that I believe I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and real. Violet felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. "Nathan," she began, then stopped, overcome with emotion. Gathering her courage, she continued, "I care for you too, and for Emma and Joseph. More than I thought possible in such a short time." Hope blazed in Nathan's eyes. "Enough to consider a future with us?" The question was direct, as was Nathan's way. Violet appreciated his straightforwardness even as she grappled with the implications of his words. "Are you proposing?" she asked, wanting to be absolutely clear. "Not formally," Nathan replied. "Not yet, that would be too rushed, even for a man as impatient as I am." His mouth quirked in a small smile. "But I am asking if you might be open to the possibility. If you might allow me to court you properly, with marriage as the intended outcome." Violet's mind raced. She had built a life for herself in Silverwood, had established herself as a respected teacher. Marriage to Nathan would mean leaving that behind, moving to the ranch, becoming a mother to his children. It was a dramatic change to contemplate. And yet, sitting here in this warm cabin with the man who had come to mean so much to her, Violet couldn't imagine turning away from the possibility of a life with Nathan and his family. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "I would be open to that possibility, very open." The joy that transformed Nathan's face was worth any uncertainty she might feel. He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that was both gallant and deeply intimate. "You've made me very happy," he said simply. Before either could say more, the bedroom door opened and Martha emerged with Joseph in her arms, the boy still pale but clearly improved. "Look who wanted to say hello," Martha announced. Joseph's face lit up when he saw Violet. "Miss Harper, you stayed." "Of course I stayed," Violet replied, rising to go to him. "I wanted to make sure you were feeling better." As she helped Martha settle Joseph in a chair near the fire, piling blankets around him, Violet was acutely aware of Nathan's gaze following her movements. Something had shifted between them, a commitment had been made, a future contemplated. The knowledge filled her with both excitement and trepidation. The blizzard continued through that day and the next, effectively isolating the ranch. Violet sent word to town via a passing neighbor who was making the treacherous journey with urgent supplies, assuring the school board that she would return as soon as weather permitted. In the meantime, she fell into the rhythms of the young household, helping Martha with cooking and chores, tending to Joseph as he recovered, and teaching both children their lessons so they wouldn't fall behind. On the third day, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. Nathan took Violet for a walk to see the newborn calves in the barn, now a cozy refuge against the winter cold. "They're doing well despite the weather," he explained as they moved among the cattle. "We were fortunate to have the barn reinforced before the storm hit." Violet watched as he checked each animal with practiced efficiency, noting his gentle handling and the way the cattle responded to his familiar presence. This was a man in his element, confident, capable, and deeply connected to the land and animals under his care. "You love this life, don't you?" she observed. Nathan glanced up from examining a calf's leg. "I do," he admitted. "It's hard work, often frustrating, sometimes heartbreaking. But yes, I love it." He straightened, his expression becoming more serious. "Which is why I need to be honest with you, Violet. If you choose a life with me, it would be this life. Here on this ranch, I can't offer you the refinements of town, let alone a city like Philadelphia." "I'm not looking for Philadelphia," Violet assured him. "I left that behind for a reason." "Even so," Nathan persisted, "teaching has been your calling. Your independence has been important to you. Marriage to a rancher would mean changes." Violet appreciated his candor. "Yes, it would," she acknowledged. "But change isn't always negative, and as for teaching, there will always be children to teach, including your own." She smiled softly. "Besides, I've already seen that I can be useful here in other ways." Nathan's expression lightened at her words. "More than useful," he corrected. "Vital." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. In the dim light of the barn, surrounded by the quiet sounds of animals, Nathan Young looked at Violet Harper as if she were the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Violet's heart raced at the simple request. "Yes," she breathed. Nathan's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle yet sure. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as Violet responded. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Violet found herself clinging to his shoulders as the kiss continued, awakening feelings she had never experienced before. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I've wanted to do that since the day you rode through that storm," he confessed. Violet smiled, feeling a new confidence in the rightness of the path before them. "I'm glad you finally did." The next day, with the roads somewhat cleared, Nathan drove Violet back to Silverwood. The parting was difficult, especially with Emma clinging to Violet and begging her to stay. "I'll see you very soon," Violet promised the little girl, "and you can write to me in the meantime." "Practice your letters. Every day?" Emma asked hopefully. "Perhaps once a week," Nathan interjected with a smile. "The mail doesn't run every day, sweetheart." As he helped Violet down from the wagon in front of her small house, Nathan kept hold of her hand longer than strictly necessary. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly. "About courting you. With your permission, I'd like to make my intentions known." Violet understood what he was asking. In a small town like Silverwood, their relationship would be subject to scrutiny and gossip. By formally declaring his intentions, Nathan would be signaling the seriousness of their attachment and placing it within the bounds of propriety. "You have my permission," she said, squeezing his hand. "And my encouragement." The smile that lit Nathan's face was worth any gossip they might face. "Then I'll call on you properly this Sunday, Miss Harper," he said, his formal words belied by the warmth in his eyes. "After church." "I'll look forward to it, Mr. Young," Violet replied, matching his tone but with a smile she couldn't suppress. True to his word, Nathan presented himself at Violet's door the following Sunday, dressed in his best clothes and bearing a small nosegay of winter greenery and dried flowers that Emma had helped arrange. He escorted Violet to dinner at the hotel, where they were the subject of much curious attention from the other diners. "People are staring," Violet murmured, though she found she didn't mind as much as she might have expected. "Let them," Nathan replied with a shrug. "They'll have even more to talk about when they learn I've asked permission to court the schoolteacher." And talk they did. Over the coming weeks, Violet became accustomed to the speculative glances and whispered conversations that followed her through town. Some, like Mrs. Abernathy and the kindly Dr. Peterson, offered sincere congratulations. Others, particularly Mrs. Wilford, whose son had shown interest in Violet, were less enthusiastic. A widower with 2 young children, living all the way out at that isolated ranch, Mrs. Wilford sniffed when she encountered Violet at the general store. "I would have thought a woman of your education would aim higher, Miss Harper." "I consider myself aiming quite high indeed, Mrs. Wilford," Violet replied pleasantly. "Nathan Young is one of the finest men I've ever known." The winter months brought a steady rhythm to their courtship. Nathan came to town every Sunday, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone. They attended church together, took meals at the hotel, and gradually became accepted as a couple by most of Silverwood's residents. On the occasions when weather permitted, Violet rode out to the ranch, where she was now greeted as family rather than guest. As spring approached, bringing with it the mud season that made travel between town and ranch even more difficult, Nathan broached the subject that had been increasingly on both their minds. "I had thought to wait until summer," he said as they walked along Silverwood's Main Street one Sunday afternoon in late March, "to give you more time to be certain, but these separations grow harder each week." Violet's heart quickened, knowing what was coming. "They do," she agreed. Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Right there on the public thoroughfare with several townspeople watching curiously, he asked the question Violet had been waiting for. "Violet Harper, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, a mother to my children, and make our house a home again?" Though she had anticipated the proposal, the actual moment still filled Violet with overwhelming emotion. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain despite the tears threatening to spill. "Yes, Nathan Young, I will marry you." Nathan's face transformed with joy. Heedless of the onlookers, he pulled Violet into a brief but fervent embrace before stepping back to retrieve something from his pocket, a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It was my grandmother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "Mother insisted I should give it to you." Violet admired the ring, touched by its history and significance. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Perfect." They were married 6 weeks later in Silverwood's small church, with Martha, Emma, and Joseph standing proudly beside them. Emma scattered wildflower petals down the aisle, taking her role as flower girl with utmost seriousness, while Joseph bore the rings on a small cushion Martha had embroidered for the occasion. After a simple reception at the hotel, Nathan took his new family home to the ranch that would now be Violet's home as well. As they approached, Violet saw that the cabin had been freshly painted and that new curtains Martha's work, no doubt, hung in the windows. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young," Nathan said softly as he helped her down from the wagon. "Home," Violet repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, it is." That night, after the children were asleep and Martha had tactfully retired early to the small cabin Nathan had built for her near the main house, husband and wife were finally alone. Their coming together was both passionate and tender, a culmination of the love that had grown between them since that stormy night when Violet had ridden through darkness to bring healing to this family that was now her own. Later, as they lay entwined, Nathan traced the curve of Violet's cheek with gentle fingers. "I never thought I would find this again," he confessed. "After Rebecca died, I believed that part of my life was over. And I never thought I would find it at all," Violet replied. "Certainly not here at the end of a storm-swept trail." Nathan smiled, pulling her closer. "Perhaps that's how the best love stories begin, unexpectedly, in the midst of struggle." "Perhaps," Violet agreed, resting her head on his chest. Or perhaps it's simply that love finds us when we're brave enough to ride through storms for each other. In the years that followed, Violet often thought of that first desperate journey through the tempest. What had begun as a mission of mercy had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. Nathan had been right. Ranch life was hard, often challenging, sometimes heartbreaking, but it was also deeply rewarding. Emma and Joseph thrived under her care, their initial affection deepening into genuine love. Violet continued their education at home, establishing a routine of lessons each morning before the children joined their father for ranch chores. In time, other neighboring families began sending their children to the young ranch for instruction, and Violet found herself once again a teacher, though in a setting far different from the Silverwood schoolhouse. 2 years after their marriage, Violet gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, who inherited her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. 2 years later, a son followed Samuel, named for Nathan's father. On the 5th anniversary of the night Violet had ridden through the storm, Nathan surprised her with a piano, a second-hand upright he'd arranged to have transported all the way from Helena at considerable expense and effort. "How did you manage this?" Violet asked, overcome with emotion as she ran her fingers over the ivory keys. "With considerable help and planning," Nathan admitted with a grin. "And a conspiracy of silence from our children, who have been remarkably good at keeping secrets." That evening, with their family gathered around, Violet played for the first time in years. The music filled the cabin, now expanded to accommodate their growing family with warmth and joy. As Nathan stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder, their 4 children listening with expressions ranging from delight to awe, Violet felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, where she had always been meant to be. Not in Philadelphia's refined parlors, not even in Silverwood's respectable schoolhouse, but here in this home she had built with Nathan, surrounded by the family they had forged together. She had ridden through a storm to bring medicine to a stranger's children and had stayed one night out of necessity. But in the truest sense, she had never left. From that first night, through all the nights that followed, through seasons of plenty and hardship, through the births of their children and the passing of Martha Gentle in her sleep, at the age of 83, Violet had remained where her heart had led her. As the last notes of the song faded, Nathan bent to kiss the top of her head. "Thank you," he whispered, his words carrying a meaning that encompassed far more than the music. "For what?" Violet asked, tilting her face up to his. "For riding through that storm," Nathan replied simply. "And for staying." Violet reached up to touch his beloved face, still handsome despite the lines that years of sun and wind had etched there. "Always," she promised, and it was a promise she knew she would keep through whatever storms might come for all the days of their lives.